Well, good morning, everyone. I probably don't need the mic. I can just yell, but for the viewers here, welcome back to the course Journeys Across the Waters, which is jointly put on by the Center for Latin American Studies and the Center for European Studies at the University of Florida. We're happy today to welcome Professor Carlos de la Torre, who'll be presenting on radical right populism, fascism, or I just wanted to say that the Institute for Learning and Retirement is a haven for a variety of viewpoints, both conservative and liberal and leftist, and we're even more open to them than the University of Florida is at times, and that's shown by the fact that recently we have invited Hamilton School professors to speak. We had one already and 3 more to go, and perhaps more later. And so it's important that we share a variety of viewpoints and welcome them. So let me introduce the professor. Carlos de la Torre is professor at the Center for Latin American Studies at the University of Florida. He has a PhD in sociology from the New School for Social Research. His areas of research are populism, democratization, and authoritarianism. He's the author of 11 books and 9 edited volumes, mostly on populism. His most recent publications are Populism and Fascism's Elements in the History and Politics of Fascism, published by Cambridge University Press in March of 2025, as well as Populism and Key Concepts in Social and Political Theory, co-edited with Oscar Mazzolini, published by Leiden and Boston Brill in 2023, and then Global Populisms, published by Routledge in 2021, with Tritip Srinagar, and which has been translated into Spanish and Thai. Professor de la Torre.
Is this working? Okay. Thanks so much for the invitation. It's a real pleasure to be here. I want to share with you some of the debates that are happening now in the cultural and the social sciences on how to describe or how to understand the regimes or the administrations of the first Trump and Jair Bolsonaro in Brazil and the second Trump. That's the title of my presentation. But before talking about that, I wanted to share something about what is my positionality, where I am coming from, so you understand. I wanted to share that with you. So the guy with the hat is José María Velasco Ibarra. He was president of Ecuador 5 times. That photo must have been taken in the late 60s, early 70s. In that photograph of Velasco Ibarra, who was 5-time president of Ecuador and only finished 1 term in office, illustrates some of the things that I have learned, have been trying to understand. First of all, populism has led to polarization, to affective polarization, and meaning that people hate or love the particular politician. And I remember as a kid, my family that was very united, especially my mother's side of the family. It's a very Catholic, traditional family. They were very united until this guy will come to power, when the family will split in 2 sides. People who loved Velasco, people who hated Velasco, and you couldn't have conversations any longer at the dinner table or in festivities. So the first thing is polarization that even goes into the family. The second one is the memory that I have of tear gas. My childhood, especially in the late 60s, early 70s, I remember tear gas all the time because there were demonstrations for and against this president, Velasco Ibarra. And the third thing is that my father was an editor of a newspaper, and the supporters of Velasco will go every week to throw bricks and to stone the offices of the newspaper. And so I was always afraid about his safety. So those are, some of the things that I wanted to make sense of. Why do we have this increase in polarization around a particular politician in a particular moment in time? And I've been doing studies of populism for many, many years now. The other thing that I want to show you in this photograph is the military presence there. Growing up in Ecuador, and then I live in Spain also for a short period of time, for me, a military dictatorship was something that I live under and that I know what it is. So I am coming from a perspective of democracy. I mean, I believe in the democratic freedoms that you have in liberal democracy, freedom of expression, freedom of association, freedom of intimacy. And I think that those freedoms have to be used to make democracy more democratic. For me, democracy is an unfinished process, and we can always make our democracy more democratic. I mean, it's not just a political system, it's also a way of living, a way of interacting with others. After say that, so you understand where I am coming from, let me start with this conversation that I want to have with you. First of all, Bolsonaro and Trump fit in all the definitions that we have of radical right populism. All of these are academic definitions. First of all, for some, populism is an ideology that counterposes in a Manichaean way the pure people against an evil elite and appealing to the will of the people. So they fit there. It's also considered a strategy to get to power and to govern, by which a leader, which is a charismatic leader, appeals to followers bypassing intermediary institutions and institutions of democracy. Bolsonaro and Trump also fit into that. And also, it's a political logic, it's a way of understanding politics that is based on an antagonistic struggle between two camps. Different from what liberals believe, that in democracy you have camps or you have people that might disagree on certain things, even passionately, but they share a common space. In populism, what you have is the creation of two antagonistic camps that face each other and will try to do almost anything that they can or can get away with to marginalize the other camp. Now, those are the definitions of radical right populism, and I think that both Trump, the first Trump, and Bolsonaro fit perfectly into that. So let me remind you or remember with you the dynamics of these things, of their regimes. First of all, they did not have the support of all economic elites. I mean, both Bolsonaro and Trump were supported by certain economic elites, but not by all economic elites. Second, they faced the resistance of state officials, of bureaucrats, who believe that they have to have a loyalty to their position in the state apparatus and not to a particular politician. What Bannon and Trump started to call the deep state, right? This idea of people who do not obey them because they believe that their loyalty is to their position in the state administration. Then, of course, they also face the opposition of the political opposition, the legislative, especially in Brazil, and of other institutions. But mainly, the opposition that they faced came from civil society. Remember that in the first Trump, since the moment in which he came to power, women organized the Women's March. I think it was a week after or 2 weeks after his inauguration. It was very, very soon. Then we had other marches for sciences, for gun control, especially in Florida. And the biggest social movement that has happened in this country, which was Black Lives Matter, is the biggest in terms of the number of people that participated. And what was very interesting of that movement is that it was not only African Americans who were taking part of it, but there was also a lot of white people and especially young people who were participating in that. And Bolsonaro also faced the opposition of organized civil society around his environmental policies. He wanted to open up the Amazonia for soya production. He wanted to open up the Amazonia for cattle production. And the idea is that his environmental policies and his policies towards indigenous people, which he considered them to be a handicap for progress, they needed to be, how can they have territories that should belong to the nation and to development? And then he also had all of these problems with COVID-19. Bolsonaro believed that you can just, that COVID was just a little cold, a gripecina, he will say, and he didn't do too much to take care of that or to have prevention. Governors were the ones who were protecting the population. And then you have all of these huge demonstrations saying Bolsonaro out, fora Bolsonaro. Now, because of these dynamics, the outcomes of the first Trump and Bolsonaro were there was no regime change, meaning democracy continued to exist in those two countries, but effective polarization increased. The population that was already divided. In Brazil, people or love or hate the Workers' Party and Lula, Luiz Inácio da Silva, who's the current president, they hated or loved him. So Brazil was already polarized. So was the United States. This country has been going through a period of polarization for several years. I mean, nowadays, they don't look for the middle voter, but the middle voter doesn't exist. This country is polarized. It reminds me of Ecuador when I was growing up. There are certain topics that you cannot talk about because you cannot have rational conversations, and they become very passionate. But in any case, what they were able to do is there was no regime change, polarization increased, but Bolsonaro was able to disrupt, but not totally transform state policies on education. He was against affirmative action, but affirmative action continued. He wanted to open up all of the laws that protected the environment. He wanted to get rid of ethnic rights, gender and LGBTQ rights, but he was not able to do that. And Trump was able to do certain things. First of all, I think that before Trump, there was a consensus among the elites, Republicans and Democrats, agreed that you have to have a combination of opening the economy to globalization while recognizing multiculturalism. The idea was this idea that I always tell my students, it was a Benetton image of the nation, right? When you have whites, blacks, brown people, yellow people. I mean, this idea was to give limited cultural rights to everybody. And the idea was, that goes together with globalization. But he got rid of that. He got rid of both things. First of all, this limited cultural, multicultural inclusion. And second, this idea that globalization should be favored. And he also transformed the public sphere. That's where I disagree with I am a sociologist, I'm not a political scientist. So many political scientists tell me, well, listen, Trump didn't bring regime change, but I respond to them. But what he brought was a transformation of a tolerant and open public sphere, accepting homophobia, sexism, and racism, or normalizing these languages and these ways of being that were hidden because it didn't look nice if you were an homophobic person or a racist person or openly sexist. You could still have those feelings, but you were not able to express them openly. And that changed with him. And also that he normalized paramilitary groups. He took over the Republican Party. The Republican Party, with the first Trump, became a MAGA party, his own personal organization, and all of the opposition of the traditional conservative party of this country became a Trump party. So, but democracy didn't change. We still have a democracy here and in Brazil. So, what I'm doing wrong? Okay. And then we have January 6th and January 8th, where the supporters of Trump and Bolsonaro decided to take over the symbols of power. Right? They took over in the United States, it was the Capitol. In Brazil, it was the Supreme Court and also the legislature. Now, what does that mean? First of all, these leaders did not accept losing elections. According to them, if they are the people, if they are the embodiment of the people, if they represent the interests of the people, they cannot lose an open election. So there was electoral fraud. So for Trump and for Bolsonaro, the elections were rigged. And when they did not accept the outcome of elections, they broke with one of the basic precepts of populism, which is accepting that the only way to get to power and to get out of power is by winning or losing elections. And then you have where things start to diverge. In the United States, Trump lawyers were able to outsmart the system of justice, and Trump was elected president despite having 34 felony counts. In Brazil, the thing was different because Bolsonaro was convicted for organizing a coup d'etat and for attempting to murder top politicians. I mean, there was a whole trial about that. And he was punished, as it says in the PowerPoint, for to go to jail and to serve time at jail. Now, in Brazil, many people say that you have an over interference of the systems of justice in politics. Many Brazilian political scientists have been talking about the juridification of politics. But regardless of that, what you have is that for the first time in Brazilian history, somebody who wants to give a coup d'etat face the system of justice and have to pay consequences for that. Now, let me go to the comparison between the first and the second Trump. And I think that what they say there means a lot. In 2026, Trump says, I am your voice. In 2024, he says, I am your warrior, I am your justice. And for those who have been betrayed, I am your retribution. And that's and Trump faced, Bolsonaro also faced an attack to their lives. Bolsonaro was stabbed when he was running for president, and he had to endure several very painful surgeries in his stomach. And his supporters said that God has saved Bolsonaro, not of his supporters, but his Christian supporters, both Catholic and fundamental Christians and Pentecostals, say that he had a mission that came from God. And that's the same thing that Trump said. They say that God has saved him from losing his life and that he has a mission, almost a biblical mission, to redeem the United States and the American people. So after this, after the events of these insurrections done in the name of these politicians, the question of fascism and populism came back to not only to the social sciences, but also to the political debate. Remember that Kamala Harris argued that Trump was a fascist, but that opposition didn't work. But also people who were in the Trump administration said that. So what I'm going to talk about now is about some arguments that I had in this very short book. Cambridge University Press, I think that to make more money, they decided to have this series called Elements, which are like very long articles or very, very short books. And this is available at the UF library, but if you want a copy of it, I can send it to you. I will be more than happy. If you want to do it, after today, you will say, I don't want to read that. Anyways, so it's too small. But anyways, what I want to do is to compare what are the elective affinities, and what are the fundamental difference between populism and fascism. So both share these elective affinities. First of all, for them, politics is not based on dialogue or on the power of the best argument and the recognition of the right of others to exist and to be free to express their points of view. For them, politics is an antagonistic struggle between friend and enemy. It's a Schmittian, going back to Carl Schmitt, who was this professor of law and philosopher in Germany. He ended being one of the ideologues of Nazism. For him, the political is based on the struggle between friend and enemy. That's what characterizes politics. And the idea is that the enemy has to be contained, has to be marginalized, because it's an existential enemy. And that, then I will talk later on how they construct enemies is a fundamental difference between populism and fascism. For both of them, they do not appeal to all of the population, but only to a sector of the population that is constructed as the right and good people. So for instance, Yeah. So who is excluded and who is included in these notions of the people, right? If you are a left-wing populist like Hugo Chavez was, the real people are the working class, the working poor, but not the oligarchy. So the oligarchy should better go to Miami. That's what he used to say. For right-wing populists in Europe and the United States, the right people or the good, right, honest people is racialized. And it becomes a particular ethnicity with a particular culture and a particular religion. And the Nazis and the fascists in the same way. They did not consider sectors of the population to really belong to the people. So they do not appeal to all, but only to a section of the population. And they also have this idea of the leader, that the leader has a mission. The leader is not a regular politician that is elected for 1, 2 terms, then retires, makes a lot of money giving lectures, and then opens up a library. No, the leader has a mission, and the mission that the leader has is almost biblical. I mean, it has to redeem the people from oppression. Perhaps the difference there is that in fascism, the leader, when he gets into power, and I say he because all of the fascist leaders that we have had until now have been male. Of course, Meloni is a woman, but I don't know if she's a fascist or not. That's something that we can discuss. They have the idea that they will stay in power forever. They will be occupying power forever. Whereas in populism, you have to win elections to continue to be in power. But anyway, they have this idea of the leadership as having a mission. Now, they start to be, despite these elective affinities, they are fundamentally different in the notion of the enemy. For populism, the enemy is an existential enemy that has to be contained. So what populists do is to insult, to ridicule, sometimes beat him up, and sometimes put in jail the enemy. I'm not saying that it's easy or that it's good. I am originally from Ecuador, as I show you in that slide, and we had a left-wing populist president, Rafael Correa, and when I was living in Ecuador, after living for many years in this country, I started to write columns in the newspaper, and Correa didn't like what I wrote, so he insulted me twice on national TV with my photograph, so everybody can see that I am an enemy of Correa, the people, and the nation. So it's not fun when these symbolic attacks to the enemy are not fun, are very different. But it's very different from the physical elimination of the enemy. I mean, when they put people in concentration camps, when they expel them out of the nation, or where they kill them, which is what fascists did. It's a very different notion of what to do with the enemy. And their uses of violence is also different. Populist violence, for the most part, is symbolic and rhetorical. Fascist violence. And fascism is characterized by violence. Fascism was characterized by paramilitarism and by paramilitary parties. So violence and this idea of masculinity also that goes together with violence, right? That the idea is that to be a real man, you have to fight violently against your enemies. So the use of violence in populism is mostly symbolic and rhetoric, whereas in fascism, it's paramilitarism and the idea of war, an internal war against internal enemies, and of course, an external war. And the legitimation strategies are profoundly different. For populism, winning elections is the only way to be legitimately elected to power. And when populism first started in Latin America, where you have for the first time populist regimes, it led to the expansion of the electorate. Many more people were allowed to vote under populism. They were incorporated into the political system. Whereas for fascism, they replaced elections with ceremonies of mass assent. According to Carl Schmitt, it's much more democratic to have a big crowd cheering for the leader and recognizing themselves in the leader than having elections, because for Schmitt, parliamentarism was a mockery of democracy. And finally, historicity. Fascism emerged at a particular moment in time in the interwar period in Europe. And during that time, Bolshevism, communism, was a real threat. What I mean by a real threat is not only that you have the Russian Revolution, but in Italy, for instance, you have the occupation of land, and you have the occupation of factories in Milan. In Germany, you had communist rebellions that failed. So communism, or the threat of communism, was a real possibility. And so the right started to use fascist paramilitary groups to maintain their power. And the elites did that. Another thing that the elites did during the time of fascism is to invite fascists to be part of government. Hitler or Mussolini never won a popular election. They were invited to power by political elites that thought that they could tame these new politicians who were not very smart or did not belong to the right social class. So, and at the time in which fascism emerged, both the radical left and the radical right did not like democracy, did not like parliamentarism. So Carl Schmitt wrote books saying that parliamentarism distorts democracy, and Lenin talked about the dictatorship of the proletariat. So it emerged in a moment in which you have the threat of communism. It was a moment in which people did not believe in democracy or parliamentarism. And and in which the elites allowed, invited to power these leaders. Populism is not like that. I mean, populism has emerged at different moments in time. It's not linked to a particular moment. Populism is not only from the right, it can also be from the left. So they have different historicities. And now, for some, fascism could only exist in the particular period of time. For those who argue that fascism could come back, and they use the words post-fascism or wannabe fascists, you have to create total enemies. The idea of the total enemy are people who are a threat to the integrity of the nation, of society. So the first total enemy that has been created by the radical right in the United States and in Europe are non-white immigrants of colonial origin. And they are seen as an invasion, they are seen as a threat, as a disease that could contaminate the purity of the host population. And of course, that brings all of these emotions of fear, repulsion, and that bring these ideas of hatred and cruelty to non-white immigrants. That's the second enemy are the promoters of what they call gender ideology. The Catholic Church has created this notion of gender ideology to put together, but not only the Catholic Church. I think I use the Catholic Church because they have all of these intellectuals that have done that, but other religious organizations too. The idea is that you have all of these perverse enemies of the family, all of these people that are trying to get rid of the nuclear, heterosexual, patriarchal family that is the cell of society. So all of these people that want to bring perversion to the cell of society have to be identified, have to be named, identified, and I don't know what else you can do with them. I think in this country, what we have seen first is the attack to transgender people who are the less empowered, seen as illegal aliens, as they call them. And the third enemy, or total enemy, are communists, but in the time in which there is no communism or there is no communist threat, there is very little, the radical left doesn't exist any longer, but they can call it cultural Marxists or the lunatic left. This idea is these people that are corrupting the mind of young people. I mean, all of these people that, and so the fight against communism, I think, nowadays is orchestrated in three ways. First of all is the defense of freedom against estatism, economic freedom against estatism. So the idea is that you have too much of a state, the state doesn't let us grow, the state destroys the private enterprises. The second one is freedom from woke speech, seen as a repression of free speech. And I think that and of course, that leads to political correctness, reverse discrimination. And also, I think that there is all of this attack against leftist professors. Because supposedly we are poisoning the mind of the youth. Now, And what are the possible outcomes? And well, the people who say that there are scholars that argue that the concept of populism normalizes the radical right. What do they mean by that? Is that you have so many right-wing parties, populist parties, or left-wing populist parties that come and go. Sometimes they lose elections, they go home, wait to the next election. So it's part of the normal political process. So for some, the concept of populism normalizes the threat of the radical right. But on the other hand, if you use the concept of fascism, you are overstretching a concept that was used and very useful for a particular moment in time. Because so far, elections are the only legitimate way to get to power, and we have not seen paramilitary violence and violence from the state in the same levels as we saw it in the 1920s and 30s. So I think that there are two possible outcomes of what is happening. The first one is competitive authoritarianism. It's this term that was coined by a political scientist. And the idea is that you continue to have elections, but elections takes place in very rigged political systems, in very unequal and uneven political systems. So it's very difficult for the opposition to win, and the incumbent will stay in power for as long as he wants or can. So there the idea is that, for instance, Orbán, Erdogan, Hugo Chavez created competitive authoritarian regimes that still use elections because nowadays, and different from the 1920s and 30s, elections and democracy are important, or democracy understood as clean elections, or elections in general, but they take under very rigged conditions. There is also a group of people that say that what you have now is politicians with fascist aspirations. I mean, they have not been able to create fascist regimes because they are living a different historical moment. And why do they argue that? Because first of all, the category of the total enemies is becoming very elastic. The total enemies, I mean, at the beginning it was illegal aliens. But the illegal alien, there was also the legal alien who was here because of, I don't know, exile or were here temporarily legally when they go to they go to appear in front of immigration. They are hunted and they are put in what appears to be a concentration camp or a jail. So I mean, this idea of the illegal alien is increasing. Second of all, there is a normalization of military and police violence. They are in the cities now. The cities are resistant, but it's something that I have never, I mean, of course, in this country you have that in the 1960s, but it was different, I think. Perhaps you can correct me there, but I have never seen that. And I don't know what IC is. I mean, IC, of course, works like a paramilitary group. They do not have badges. They do not show their faces. They do not show their ID. They go to neighborhoods. They arrest people. And now it's legally to stop anybody who doesn't look like an American, meaning that we all brown people are suspicious by definition. So it's very complicated. So what are the obstacles? First of all, citizens mobilization. And I think that's what, if that work to stop the more authoritarian tendencies of Bolsonaro and Trump, I think that will be the way to stop that, because civil society shows that societies are plural. I mean, you have all of these interest groups, you have all of this diversity in terms of their proposals, in terms of their ways of acting, that show that the image of the people as one doesn't work, doesn't hold. The second protection that we have is federalism. I think that the United States now you have several United States within the United States. What is happening in Florida is not happening in California. And so, because here in Florida, we live under threats. I mean, we live under fear. At UF, we are afraid of many, many things. There is this. So this idea of losing your freedoms is not something that is happening all across the United States, but in particular in certain parts of this country. So federalism might protect us. The courts of justice have been doing a great job stopping certain things, but the Supreme Court is a problem. And the courts will only work as long as there is pressure in the streets. And of course, polarization. works against democracy, but is also a way in which Trump is limited. So I don't know where we are. I don't know how to name this moment. I think that the concept of fascism doesn't really apply to what is happening now, but could be something that is a possibility. Of course, for that to happen, you will have to, first of all, get rid of democracy, get rid of the opposition, and to socialize the people in a new ideology. And the radical right doesn't have an ideology like fascists had. Fascism wanted to create a new man, a new civilization. Nowadays, they just want to make America or whatever other country great again, which is very vague, but it's not the same as creating a new utopia. So I think that fascism, it is stretching the term, but I think that we have to be attent to what is happening. We're living through a very complicated time. Perhaps what we need is a new term. We need a new categories to make sense of what is happening now. In the 1950s, when everybody was saying that Perón in Argentina was a fascist, because Perón was an admirer of Mussolini, because it was a very authoritarian movement. This Italian Argentinian sociologist, Gino Germani, say, no, we're in front of something new. This is authoritarianism, but it's not fascism. And he invented the term national populism. What I'm trying to say with that is that perhaps in this moment, we need to come with new categories that make sense of what is happening now. And thank you, and thanks for your patience.
It's time for questions or comments. Would anybody like to say anything? We have people online as well.
I really enjoyed this. I don't know that it made me feel better about today's politics, but it made me feel a little more informed about it. Since you're a sociologist, which I am not, I tend to look at things in a more of a political science perspective because that's my training. But I'm really interested in the criticism that many people have that civil society in the US is just not equipped to deal with the fractious politics that we have. And that unless leaders emerge on the civil side, on the, in other words, outside of the elective office frame, but people that emerge socially, that the culture can respond in a way that is meaningful to militate against these populist or authoritarian forces. And I'm not really sure where they think this might come from. Maybe they're just looking at leaders on the state level, like Newsom. But I'm wondering what you as a sociologist have to say about whether or not civil society intellectually, socially, using the media can respond to these forces in the United States. Is that clear?
Yes. It's a very interesting point because coming from sociology and because I studied with Charles Tilly and all of these people working on social movements, and it was a time in which people were talking about the new social movements, feminism, gay rights, environmentalism. My reading is a bit different. From me, the United States has a very strong tradition of social movement activism. I mean, for me, the 1960s were a time of democratization of this country. Because in the 1960s, the United States ceased to be a racial dictatorship. That's not my term. It's a term of the authors of this book, Racial Formations, because African Americans could not vote. African Americans were not citizens. So the movements of the 60s, starting with movements for racial justice that was not only for African Americans, but also for Latinos, for Asians, et cetera, and then the women's movements, the LGBTQ movements, they really democratized this country. And I think that the first Trump have to face this great pushback from civil society. I mean, it was, yeah, and I think that's what stopped him, or that's what creates this ability for politicians, or this opens the opportunities for politicians and or state officials to resist. And nowadays, I think, and that's my hope, perhaps because we have on Saturday the No Kings demonstration again. I think that's where we can voice our reaction. And I also think that you have had a lot of pushbacks in cities to ISIL, for instance, in Chicago. But not just Chicago, LA, and other places where they have militarized. So I think that if you have a pushback from civil society, politicians can build on that. The legal system can also find strength in that. But not only that, the other thing that is very important is to have a media that will be able to expose corruption and abuses of power. And the media resisted in this country to the first Trump. Nowadays, they are doing other things with television by all of this merging of different television companies. But I think that the media is also very important. So I want to be optimistic because of the history of this country. And that's the only, well, that's the main hope that I see that we can have. But of course, for me, what is amazing is that, especially at UF, where I am a professor, there's a lot of fear, right? Something that I never faced in this country. Students are afraid of protesting because they can end up expelled from the university. Faculty are afraid of teaching what they are supposed to do because it's illegal. So it's a moment of fear, and when you have fear, democracy is not working any longer because we need to have freedoms to express our diverse opinions. And coming from a region where we have had the dictatorship in Ecuador was mild. It was not Argentina. I mean, there were no thousands of people killed. But anyway, it was a dictatorship. So dictatorships are not fun, and they create fear. Sorry, it was a very convoluted answer to your question.
Other comments or questions? I wanted to talk about the use of the anti-Semitism as a justification for repression at universities, and whether this reflects in any way a movement towards fascism. Are there protected groups that are protected at the expense of other groups under fascism or populism?
That's a very good comment, because see, if the enemy, especially in Germany in the 1930s, was the image of the Jew that was invented as these people who are a virus, who are going to destroy, right, the nucleus of society. And they have to be named, they have to be recognized, they have to be put apart, and then they have to be eliminated. I mean, it worked in different ways. But that was the image of the Jew. Well, instead of the image of the Jew, now I think it is the illegal alien, the illegal immigrant in this country, mostly of Hispanic descent, of Mexican descent. But I think that we all Latinos are Mexican now. I remember my kids, when they first came, my kids were born in this country. We live in Ecuador for a long time. And then they come back, and their first day of school, they are there, and somebody say, "Hey, yo, Mexican." So one of my sons says, "I am not Mexican, I am from Ecuador." And the other kid's response was, "I don't care from what part of Mexico you are." So I think that there is this idea that we are all Mexicans, and in Europe is the image of the Muslim, right? The Muslim threat. And here I think it is perverse and fascinating how they are using this idea of, I mean, any critique to the state of Israel is constructed now as anti-Semitism. And one thing is to be critical of Netanyahu, which I think is the worst thing that could happen to Israel, because he's a right-wing populist that is staying in power just to protect himself from going to jail. And what he's doing is horrible, but the use of the idea of anti-Semitism to create fear and repression is, I mean, I think it's in the United States, it's terrible. In other parts of Europe too. But in Europe, people have been going to the streets to protest against the genocide in Gaza, something that they stopped here by repressing the movement. And of course, there are many ways to do that. You expel students, you try to expel people who have green cards or who have student visas. But it's very interesting and that in itself, I think, these new uses of anti-Semitism to repress people who, it's something new, and it's something that should be studied in itself.
Thank you.
I have another question. I'm guessing that you watch what President Trump does pretty carefully. And I'm wondering if you see any missteps that he either has made or seems to be making now in any way, in terms of reaching his goals.
What amazes me from the first Trump and the second Trump is that he's made of Teflon. Everything, nothing sticks. But I think that the elections that we will have in 2026 are going to tell us where this country is going. Gerrymandering is going to continue to increase. Repression to selected political figures and social movements is going to increase. So if that is the case, the 2026 elections will take place in an electoral field that is not even, which will allow Trump to continue, and Trump and his allies to continue to have a majority. Now, another option that I can see, because sometimes I am very pessimistic and I have insomnia, is that the 2026 elections will not take place because Trump can declare national emergency, and he can use the attacks to Venezuela, supposed boats with drugs, to say that the United States is in a new war. So I don't know what's going to happen. I think it's very difficult to do that. But see, Trump, what I admire of Trump is that the first Trump didn't know what to do. The second Trump has learned a lot. So they learn a lot and they attack all of the institutions and movements that were opposing him, the deep state, social movements, the media, oppositional politicians. So they came, and it was not just Trump, it was the Heritage Foundation. So it's much more than one person. And he has all of these people working with him that are very bright. Trump is a good communicator, a very skillful politician, but he has these very strong intellectuals nowadays with him. The first Trump only had Bannon. So I used to say, if Bannon is the is the intellectual of Trumpism, we're okay, because, but nowadays there are people that are much more prepared, that are much more prepared. So I don't know what is going to happen in the 2026 election, but I think those will mark a moment. And one of the good things of talking about fascism is that it wakes up people, perhaps. But others say that if you use the term fascism or the possible comeback of fascism, it disempowers the opposition. Because we hear fascism and we think, we are going to be in jail, we're going to be put in concentration camps, etc., etc. So I don't know, and it didn't work politically for Kamala. I don't think that was the only reason why she lost the election. I think that there were other things, but it didn't work for Kamala's. So I don't know what. But at least it opens up a series of conversations that we can have. If any of you want a copy of Populism and Fascism, please send me an email. I can send it to you. I think it's available in the UF library also, but it's easier that you send me an email and I send you the PDF.
Anyone else? Well, my background is as a USAID officer responsible for advancing democracy overseas. And when we look at democracy, we try to break through the concept that democracy equals free elections, that is much more than that. All types of institutional and legal and civil society issues that lead to accountability of government at various levels, that central or local or in between. And so, you gave a pretty good approach from a sociology perspective of the concern of populist leaders for preserving at least the veneer of democracy. The fascists seem to basically disregard it. And so, how would you describe the current Trump administration's approach to supporting democracy and democratic institutions?
I think that I think that the concept of competitive authoritarianism reflected a moment in history in which coup d'etats were not fashionable any longer. Of course, coup d'etats continue to occur, but they didn't have the allure, and the United States was not sponsoring them, or European countries were not sponsoring them as they did in the past. The idea was that the only legitimate way to get to power was through elections. And of course, to have elections, you need to have a series of other freedoms, or not totally constrain other freedoms, like freedom of speech, freedom of association, etc. But I think that the time of democratic promotion and human rights is over, at least for the United States. Still, we have the European Union, who believes in democratic promotion and human rights, but the United States under Trump is not doing that. So I don't know to what extent we will see more competitive authoritarian regimes, or we just have authoritarian regimes that do not care about elections any longer. If you look at the Americas, we have governments that do not care about elections whatsoever. Maduro in Venezuela, Ortega in Nicaragua, the Cuban government, or Bukele in El Salvador. So I think that we are under new moments of democratic erosion. I hope that still, there are some, that the international community will still continue to promote democracy and human rights. But what the United States has done with the second Trump is to get rid of totally about that. And the United States is not accepting refugees. I mean, it's getting rid of people who came to this country because of violence and threats to their lives. And what they did by closing USAID it's very cruel, right? Because it will lead to the death of so many people that depended on American aid and American help, and all of the democratic promotion that went with that. So I think we are in a new time that I don't know how to name it, trying to make sense of it.
Great, thanks again. Yes? No. Okay, so let's thank Professor de la Torre.
Thank you. And
I'll share his email address so that in case you would like to request the book.
Thank you.